All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome back for another episode in our paid customer training series. Excited to join you today with my good friend, Jeff. We'll introduce ourselves here in just a second. For those of you attending for the first time, we're here today to talk about managing sensitive data and preventing data leaks. So as promised, our fantastic intros, building the suspense from the intro slide to this one. My name is Mike Patterson. I'm currently a workspace for education specialist serving our North America customer base, joined by my good friend, Jeff Kurtz.
Hey, everyone. I'm a solutions engineer with Google for Education, work across the world with our workspace for education customers. Very happy to be with you all today.
All right, so we're going to start with some housekeeping. If you hadn't noticed already, in the top right-hand corner of this deck, which you all have access to, you can see two links. One is to the deck that we're presenting from today. So if you want to get access to any of the content, any of the links that Jeff and I will be referring to over the course of today's session, you'll be able to do that, as well as a link back to our site where you can find all of the fantastic sessions, including the past recordings. So again, for those of you that are just tuning in for the first time, you can go back and watch all the amazing episodes that you've already missed, as well as seeing what's upcoming for the rest of our episodes over the next couple of weeks here. So a couple other things to point out. Please ask questions in the chat. You have access to that. Our fantastic teammate, Devin, is emceeing from the background here, and she's making sure that Jeff and I answer all the questions and as well as stay on time. It's going to be an action-packed 30 minutes, possibly a little bit less. Jeff and I are big fans of giving back the gift of time whenever possible. Over to you, Jeff.
Thanks, Mike. So to start with today, we wanted to talk about the checklist. There is a checklist that is linked and available for you to check out. We put this together because there is so much to take a look at when it comes to managing sensitive data. We can only cover so much in a 30-minute session today. We're going to focus primarily on the features that are available to you in Standard and Plus. But there's a lot that we can't cover today. We wanted to make sure you have a really solid foundation for what we're going to talk about today. So here's the checklist. When you have time, check it out. There are some links to quite a number of Help Center articles, information on things like data loss prevention, which is, I think, critical to managing sensitive data. It's actually built for managing sensitive data and built to help prevent data leaks. So links are here on DLP for Gmail and Drive. There are some best practices. There are a couple of other pieces of information here that I think are really critical. So take a look at the checklist when you can. It'll give you a solid foundation for everything we're going to talk about today. And with that, Mike, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks, Jeff. Just wanted to state again, such a great resource, especially as many of you are right back at the start of school or ramping back up for the start of the school year, regardless of what your learning community is coming back in, whether hybrid, full remote, or full in-person. Always a good opportunity to review current settings for your domains. So first tool we're going to take a look at today, which all of you have access to in your admin console, is ContextAware Access. This is a functionality that I know Jeff and I personally have been very excited about because this is really the definition of a premium function or tool that you all are getting access to. This is one more layer controlling how folks can or cannot access content within your domain, tools, and functionality. So ContextAware Access really allows you to create policies based on attributions such as user identity, location, even device security status, or even IP address, and controlling access to applications like Google Drive, everything else you see in the list here. And Jeff's going to show you how to navigate here to ContextAware in just a second. But this is about figuring out ways to continue to be effective in blocking bad actors and blocking the folks that unfortunately continue to target K-12. So Jeff's going to take over here and demo for you the ways that you can further prevent threats. And if you haven't seen this yet, again, encourage you to follow along, take a look at some of these and make sure that you bookmark this, if you will, to come back to and explore. We'll talk about a resource later that can lay the foundation for you to build some of these policies. Over to you, Jeff.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mike. So the first thing we're going to do here is we're going to jump into our admin console. Of course, you're all very familiar with the Workspace admin console. ContextAware sits under security, and so you want to make sure that you have a Workspace for Education Standard or Plus license assigned to your account, to the account that you're logging in with. Once you do, you should see ContextAware Access here. First things first is we can see it's on for everyone. If for some reason it's turned off for you, you'll want to turn it on using the switch that's here. There are essentially kind of three things that we can do and we want to take a look at. There are access levels, which kind of define the policies. There are the assignment of access levels, how we apply those policies to different Workspace apps. And then finally, kind of a small but critical feature is the message that users receive if an app is blocked. So let's take a look at the access levels. And in this case, we're going to create a new access level. And we have some options. Again, kind of thinking about the use cases here. I think there are a number of really critical use cases for education. One use case might be, your users are likely located in one particular country, whether that's the US or Germany or Japan or wherever it might be. And it's likely that you don't, have as many users in other countries. Or at least in every country, right? And so you could say, you know what, I want to lock down our Workspace environment to our primary country and perhaps a few other countries where we know, users are based or they, commonly travel to. Anyone outside of those geographic locations would not be able to access Workspace, or at least certain applications. Another thing you could consider is you could have different policies based on IP address, for example. So you could have policies for your school, network that are different than when folks are out of the network. You could build policies based on devices. So for example, let's say, you have a department of staff, they work with very sensitive data. You only want them to access their Google Drive files when they're using devices that are secure. So you could set up a policy to say, this group of users, they can only access Google Drive when they are on, let's say, our company-owned devices, or when their devices have encryption turned on, right? Or certain OS, things like that. So basically, we would enter a name and a description here, and then we would set up our conditions. And you can see you can actually have multiple conditions. In terms of our first condition here, we can say that the condition needs to meet certain attributes or don't meet certain attributes, right? So we can be very flexible in how we set this up. And when we look at the attributes here, we can see we have a few. As I mentioned, IP subnet, geographic origin, we can have device policies, we can have device OS, or we can actually have an access level, another access level that we've created previously. For example, if I select geographic origin, I then get this country picker that, of course, we're all familiar with. And so I could build different countries and different combinations and things like that.
Hey, Jeff, sorry to jump in real quick. We had a few folks commenting in that they were wondering if you could zoom in a little bit on your screen.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much, Mike. And thanks, folks, for commenting in on this. Give me 1 second here. Apologies. I forget that it always appears a little bit smaller on these webinars. So hopefully that is better. So let's take a look at these again, just so you can make sure you can see. So we start with our condition 1. We select meet attributes or don't meet attributes. We select our attribute here, and then we can put in the specific value, right? IP subnet, we put that in here. Device policy, we can select the type of device policy. We could say company owned, for example. We could say screen lock is required, device encryption, etc. And so let's say I put device encryption, I say encrypted, and there we've got our first condition. I could add another attribute to this particular condition if I'd like. I could also add another condition. And of course, if I'm adding multiple conditions, I have and or. So you can really build complex policies here. You could say, my users, they need to be in Canada, and they also have to be on our company-owned devices, right? You could use an or condition, right? You could do any number of things here. Once you have these access levels created, then what we want to do is we want to assign them to our users and to our apps. So we go into assign access levels. And of course, we're familiar with this picker on the left-hand side where we get to pick users, groups, or organizational units. This does work for groups. So if you wanted to select a group instead of an OU, if that's more flexible for you, you can do that. And then, of course, we have our 14 apps that we can apply these to. So for example, as I mentioned, if you wanted to say this group, they need to have company-owned devices to work with Drive and Docs, you would select Drive and Docs. You could select all your apps and make it apply across the board. You could select just certain apps. You could say my users can only use Google Chat, for example, when they are on our school network or when they're not on our school network, right? So you could define different policies based on different apps and different criteria. The last thing that I will show you is, of course, this user message. So let's say we've set a geographic location. The users have to be in the US. Let's say I travel to Canada. I try to log into my Workspace account. I'm going to get a message that it's blocked. And you can put in a message here up to 299 characters to say, give your users more information, perhaps who they should contact or why this particular policy is set in place. So I think, in summary, it's a very easy feature to set up. I think it's worth at least testing. You can always test this with a test group or a test OU to kind of see how it works. I think it's a really, really great feature from a security standpoint, right? Making sure that your environment is secure, making sure that users, especially users who are working with sensitive data, are doing so in the way that you want them to be, right? Are in the location you want them to be, are using the devices you want them to be using, and things like that. With that, I'm going to pass it. Actually, I'm going to keep going here for just a second and talk about a few additional features. These, unfortunately, we can't demo today for a couple of reasons, but I do want to talk through them. And note that a couple are in beta, one is coming soon, and there's a link here to the beta. But I think these are really great features sitting on top of things like ContextAware and DLP, or data loss prevention, to help you manage sensitive data. The first is drive labels. This is also known as metadata. This has actually been in a beta program for quite a while. Some of you may already be using it. This is really interesting. So this is essentially the ability to create and apply labels to your data, specifically doc sheets and slide files in Drive. The idea here is you could create almost any type of label, but what we've seen is that organizations are using this primarily for sensitivity. So, for example, you could say, a certain level of sensitivity for data. Let's say you're working with a government organization, right? Or you're doing research of some kind. You could have a sensitivity label that's like, PII versus non-PII. You could have labels for things like IEPs, right? Sensitive student data. You could even have more kind of benign labels like, draft, in review, approved, things like that. You can set up these labels in the admin console. You can then create different types of access levels to decide who can create labels, who can edit those labels, who can use those labels. Gives you a lot of flexibility there. And then you can even actually take a step further. So once you have those labels in place, not only can your users then apply those labels based on the permissions that you give them, but you can actually use those labels in things like data loss prevention rules. So you can set up data loss prevention to scan certain types of files based on their sensitivity labels. You can even set up data loss prevention to actually apply those labels for you based on the content in the files. So for example, you could set up a rule that says, if you find the student ID number in a particular drive file, apply this particular label to it so that we know this file is sensitive and contains student ID numbers. So really cool integration there with data loss prevention, and a useful feature. And again, there's a link here at the bottom of the slide to sign up for the beta if you're interested in trying this out. The second thing I want to mention, also in beta, is client-side encryption for Drive. So obviously, this is not going to be critical for everyone, but for certain organizations, this is really a must-have. The idea here is while Workspace encrypts all data, right? We encrypt data in transit as it's moving between machines. We encrypt it at rest as it's sitting on our servers. Some organizations, because of regulatory requirements, maybe they're working with top secret information, right? Need to have that extra layer of protection, that extra kind of peace of mind, if you will, and have that client-side encryption. There are a number of third-party encryption providers that are out there that we're working with. If you're using encryption today, perhaps you're probably familiar with these providers. They allow you essentially to create and store keys for files that you own. And the way this works with Drive is that this encryption is applied to the files before they get to our servers, essentially. So they are, encrypted on our servers with our encryption, but they're encrypted with your encryption, right? So there is no way that anyone can access those files unless they have the key that is in your possession. So really critical feature for some organizations. Again, this is in beta, and you can apply for the beta in the link below if you'd like to try it out. The third thing we want to mention, this is not yet available, but it is coming soon. And you can get notified of the beta if you sign up from that link below, is what we call trust rules. The idea here is, organizations have asked us for more control over who can share with whom, especially looking across sort of internal and external sharing. So for example, we've had schools say, this particular group of users, we don't want them sharing anything with external users, right? Maybe teachers, that's okay, but certain students, we don't want them sharing outside. And if some of that, of course, you can do today, right, with Drive sharing rules. But we wanted to get even more granular, right? And so we might want to say, these particular groups of students, they can only share with teachers within my organization. Or they can only share with, this particular group. Or in terms of receiving files, right? You could say, I only want my students receiving files from, let's say, teachers as opposed to other students. So giving you more control, giving you more flexibility, giving you more granularity over the Drive sharing settings. And that's what trust rules is really meant to do. So for example, I might have, again, a group of users, they're working with very sensitive information. They might be doing a research project, right, in higher ed. And I only want them sharing within their group. I don't want them sharing Drive files with anyone else outside of that group at the university. And so I could set up those sharing boundaries and put that in place for that group of users. And then when they go in Drive and they click the share button, they'd be able to add other users within their group, but they would not be able to add anyone from outside of that group. And very similarly with sort of however you set it up, right? Anytime someone goes to share, they'll be allowed to share with the people that you've allowed them to share with, but they won't be allowed to share with anyone else. So I think a really critical feature, especially when it comes to managing sensitive data. And again, this is coming soon. And you can get notified when the beta is available by signing up at the link below.
One thing before we jump to the next slide, I just want to point out is everything that you see on this slide here, in addition to everything else that we've mentioned, that we announced at the Anywhere School, This is all based largely on the feedback that you continue to give us about things that are missing, particularly from our paid editions, which you all have invested and partnered with us on. So just wanted to take a moment to recognize the fact that your feedback is critical. We listen to it, we hear it. And, Jeff is actually one of the individuals that helps drive that feedback back to our product leads, and making sure that they hear the continued needs that you all have, trying to make your lives a little bit easier, one functionality at a time. So please know that they don't go into a virtual round file. They go to live humans on our end that help bring some of these things to life. So please keep that feedback coming. It makes us better, and again, makes your lives a little bit easier, and we both win. So just wanted to state that as this will be an ongoing thing, and it has been a part of what we do and will continue to do thanks to your all's feedback.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Mike. And I'll actually pass it back to you to talk about our next feature.
Yeah, so the last one we're really going to dive into today, and this will be the last one with kind of a tell and show, if we're going a little bit backwards from the show and tell you all are used to. This is about our data regions functionality. And, our data regions functionality from a global perspective, there's a lot happening in the global market as far as folks being very conscious, a lot of times for federal and legal requirements, having to have their data at rest, where they currently are learning. And that's any cloud stored or cloud-based data. In the United States, this is starting to be a little bit more progressive as far as individual states being more conscious of how and where data is stored and how and where it can be accessed from the system. So we are very conscious of compliance regulations and what all of our schools globally have to deal with. And therefore, we've brought that element of control via data regions into the paid editions as well. So this fine-grained control allows you to pick which of our data centers you'd like to have your data access in. Unfortunately, we don't have data centers in every part of the world yet, but the places we do, we believe, gives a little bit more choice to some of our customers that we serve globally. So Jeff, in just a minute, is really going to show you how you can go in and enable data regions, turn it on. The one thing that I'll preface this with, and you'll hear it from Jeff again, this isn't an instant flip the switch on and everything's suddenly going to be located in your selected data center. It will take a little bit of time. But as far as getting it set up and running, that's the easy part that Jeff's going to show you here in just a minute. So just know that this functionality is there. It's not for everyone right now. But as data and compliance requirements continue to evolve, this may be something that you'll revisit down the road. Over to you, Jeff.
Awesome. Thanks, Mike. Yeah. And I think, to add to that, I think that the piece that you want to consider with this particular functionality is kind of the trade-off between location and latency, right? So, we always strive to keep data as close to users as possible. If your users are located in the United States, it's likely that at least the primary copy of that data is going to be in the United States. Anyway, even without data regions. But we also want to make sure that in the event of some kind of disaster, right, that there's reliability, that there's redundancy. And so, we want to make sure that you always have access to your data. If you were to apply a data regions policy, let's say you want that data in Europe, it will stay within Europe, but of course there's a latency concern if some of your users then travel outside of Europe, right? It may just take a little bit longer to get that data back. So it's always kind of weighing that piece, but obviously if this is a regulatory requirement or issue for you, this feature is available. Very easy to implement. Essentially, in the admin console, there we go. In this case, we are actually under account settings in the admin console, over here under account, and then under data regions. This will apply to anyone who has the standard or plus license. So what I mean by that is, obviously you need a license on your own account in order to access and set up this policy. But if you wanted all of your users' data to be part of this policy, then you need to make sure that all of those users are licensed with that appropriate license. So you can see here, essentially very, very easy. Again, I can select users, groups, or organizational units. For example, if I wanted to apply this policy just to a particular group, let's say that's working with very sensitive information, let's say they're doing some kind of research, right? You need to make sure that that group's data remains within this particular region. You could apply this just to the group and not to everyone else. And then at that point, of course, you have this choice, no preference, United States or Europe, and then you can click save. As Mike mentioned, we know this is currently limited, right? Obviously, we don't have additional regions. We certainly have been asked for that. That's something that feedback that we've brought back to the team. We certainly hope to have that at some point in the future. But for now, if this makes sense for you, you can apply this policy. And then actually, once the policy is applied, it takes a little bit of time, as Mike said, for all of the data to be moved to the appropriate data center. It depends on how much data that you have, but generally speaking, I would say within about 48 hours or so, it's likely to be complete. And there'll actually be under reporting, there'll actually be a report that you can view once you've set this policy to see the progress of that move. So you'll be able to see what data has been moved, what's remaining, and you can kind of keep checking up on the status.
One thing, Jeff, if I can point out before you migrate away from the screen here,
Yeah.
in that purple box at the top, a super helpful reminder, not just for data regions, but in general. You all have licensing for the most part. If you have the PDL or partial domain licensing, you only receive licenses for your staff. Obviously important to assign all that you purchased. For those of you that bought full domain licensing, basically a license for all of your staff and students, if you are going to use something like data regions, and there's other reasons to do this, but make sure you have all of your licenses assigned both to staff and students. You can see the call out here. Data regions in this case would actually only move or allocate the content for the users that licenses are assigned to. So if you wanted to move all of that, for instance, for our friends in the Europe area, in EMEA, this is something that is a place where you want to make sure all of your users are licensed. A lot of us had a focus on getting all of our staff members licensed, which is fine. Just go in and double check in your subscription portal in your admin console to make sure you've got those student licenses assigned as well.
That's great. Thanks so much, Mike. And with that, I know we're getting close to time. I'll pass it back to Mike. Just a reminder, if you do have any questions for us now, please do put them in the chat and Devin will let us know.
All right, so as we wrap today, we're going to give roughly 2 minutes back unless anyone has any questions. But as always, our resources slide is meant to be rich with content specific on the topics that we cover in that session. So things specifically about context-aware, those 2 different betas that Jeff mentioned with drive labels, client-side encryption, a link specifically about data regions. We also added in here, for those of you that haven't visited yet, the 30 plus ways to use Google Workspace for Education paid editions. This is linked directly into ContextAware Access and data regions, not only the how-to, which Jeff just showed you live, but also specific scenarios where you could use these tools and how you could apply them in unique situations. So encourage you to check these out if you haven't. Devin's done a great job of making sure that these are linked on the main event page as well. So please continue to go there. And with that being said, we'll open it up in the last minute or so for questions here.
And one thing I wanted to mention too is there is actually on the website where you can register, and of course it's linked in the top right. There is a feedback link there. We would love to get your feedback about these sessions. Are we, talking about everything that you've hoped? Are we talking about too much? Are we kind of getting into too many details? Are we not getting into enough details? We really want this to be useful to you, and so any feedback that you have for us is really appreciated, and we want to use that feedback to tailor our sessions going forward. And I think with that, we're right on time. I think we'll say thank you so much to everyone for joining us today or joining us on the recording. If you do have any questions for us, please let us know. Again, please submit feedback. Just a reminder, we have additional sessions coming up, another 2 sessions next week, Tuesday and Thursday at the same time, same place. Please go ahead and register for those sessions. With that, I'll pass it to Mike for our last parting words.
Not a whole lot to top the great words you shared there, my friend. We'll see you all tuned in next time, next week. If, again, head to the site, put it in your calendars, make sure you bookmark some time. If not to attend live, then to watch the recorded sessions, which will live on past these individual occurrences that we have. Some great commentary in the chat. Appreciate all of you chiming in via live. Devin dropped in some great links around how we protect your data, a variety of different resources. The licensing guide made an appearance in there. So make sure you check out all those resources. They're here to help and make your lives a little bit easier. So with that, thank you from Jeff, Devin, and myself, and we'll see you all next time.